So oysters, they are again well known for as a delicacy. They are actually one of the most grown water species in the on Earth after macroalgae, which are the first one, and we have plenty different subspecies across the world. One which is very dominating, and one maybe first thing that I remember I was surprised was that the oysters that we have in most places of Europe are Asian oysters. They have been brought to Europe about 70 years ago, because the oysters that we used to grow all went almost extinct. And so in order to save the oyster farmers in France first, and then developed in the rest of Europe, then we actively imported oyster spat from Asia. And so oysters, again, what I knew, what most people know are like, okay, it's maybe an acquired taste, and it's a fancy sort of like food. However, again, for many centuries, and still in many countries, it's more of a commodity. It's something that thrive on the shore, that cannot run away from you, that's full of protein. And so one thing that again surprised me is that all across the world, wherever in the northern hemisphere especially, we used to have oyster reefs. Like, we are familiar with coral reefs, and we've seen many pictures, and we are engaged, and we need to do more to preserve and conserve them. But in Europe, in the North America, in Northern Asia, all of our shores used to be protected and bordered by these reefs, because oysters, so they need to stick themselves to one another to grow, and they build their own environment. They build their shells, and once they die, they become a collector for new spat that will grow on them. And so time after time, it will become bigger and bigger. And this is something that we do not have a lot of images on, especially in Europe. However, in Northern America, where I would say intensive exploitation of these elements have arrived later, then they have pictures and they have tales of like mountains in estuaries that were threatening sailing. And those were not rocks. Those were breathing creatures. Those were filtering creatures, because one single oysters can filter up to 200 liters of water every single day. Meaning that everything that was passing through the river and that was coming to the sea was already epurated in some sense. There was less particles in the water, so that means more light can come in. That means the plant can grow better, and that means that more carbon can be again captured and possibly stored later on. So they were extremely present in making the environment around them very healthy, and we ate them all.
Oh, you mentioned a couple of things. One is that it was an obstacle to sailing, right? So what happens from what you just shared? Such an important, one single oyster can do so much for the environment. And so what happens when we eat them all? So when the human comes into such a chain of healthy ecosystem, so could you share the downside of that?
So that is what especially happened in Europe, let's say, where again it was a very accessible, common source of food. And so again, every image we have about oyster farming is very, very recent. Even like in everything with bags, or what you may have seen from all lines in the water, any type of culture is extremely, it's only 100 years old or so. Because before, the common way, and it was still practiced, and it is still practiced in certain areas of the world, like Florida was doing that in the early 2000s. You just take a boat and you take like a long stick or something, and then you break part of the reef and you get the oysters, and then you separate them, and that's it. You are not growing anything, you are just picking out of the reef. You are harvesting that. A little bit more like fishing, let's say. And so the more you do that, then the less oysters you have, and then the less diversity in the oysters you have for them to reproduce. And so once a population of any living being becomes very small, then you have less genetic diversity, and then often you are more exposed to certain pathogens. So this is exactly what happened. So the population shrunk just because it was overexploited, and then diseases happen and then reduce that population even more. So this is, at a certain point, we arrived at a tipping point where everything kind of like fell down in a way. And this is where in like the farmers first had a new species coming from Portugal, and then the one that we are mostly growing now from Asia. So what happens then is that one of the key elements also that I did not mention with oyster reefs is that, again, they are one of the very, very, very few marine species that is building solid elements for things to hide in or grow on. Macroalgae, seaweeds, they do not have roots. So they have some kind of cup, and then they need to have a rock, or they need to have a solid thing to grow on. If there is only sand, then they cannot develop themselves. Young animals like shrimps or even fish fry, then when they are too young, they need to have a place to hide. If you have only sand at the bottom of the sea, then it's a very, very dangerous place, because any predator can see you and eat you when you are very young. So with these simple oysters disappearing, then you lose the seaweed, you lose these forests, you lose the hiding spots for the young ones, and then at some point it doesn't become a place where fishes will reproduce, and you lose all the biodiversity that you have there.
So simple, right? That the whole chain of downfall, and I'm just the sense of interconnectedness and the consciousness of people, how important it is. Hoping once when we understand the chain that we can actually adjust our behavior. So